Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been working as a veterinarian at the military base for 3 years, but she had never seen anything quite like this. Every morning for the past 2 weeks, a tiny German Shepherd puppy sat by the main gate, watching every vehicle that passed through with hopeful brown eyes. The little dog couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, with oversized ears that flopped endearingly and paws far too big for his small body. The security guards had tried everything to catch the puppy, but he was surprisingly quick and clever for such a young animal. He would dart away whenever anyone approached, only to return to his post by the gate within hours. The base commander had finally called Dr. Mitchell, hoping she might have better luck with the frightened little creature. Standing at the gate that Tuesday morning, Sarah watched the puppy from a distance. He sat perfectly still, his tiny body alert and focused on every car that entered or left the base. His fur was matted and dirty, and she could see his ribs showing through his thin coat. Despite his obvious hunger and exhaustion, there was something determined about the way he held himself, as if he was waiting for something very important. He showed up about 2 weeks ago, Sergeant Rodriguez explained, joining Sarah by the fence. Just appeared one morning sitting right there. We've tried bringing him food and water, but he won't let us get close enough. He'll eat the food after we leave, but he always comes back to that exact same spot. Sarah studied the puppy more carefully. There was something unusual about his behavior that went beyond normal stray dog patterns. Most abandoned puppies would either approach humans for help or run away and hide. This little one was doing neither. He was waiting, watching as if he expected someone specific to come through those gates. "Has anyone reported a missing puppy?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We've checked with all the families on base and no one's missing a German Shepherd puppy. Animal control in the nearby towns hasn't had any reports either. It's like he just appeared out of nowhere." As they spoke, a military convoy pulled up to the gate. The puppy immediately stood up, his tail wagging tentatively as he watched each vehicle pass. When the last truck went through and no one stopped for him, his tail drooped and he settled back into his waiting position. Sarah felt her heart break a little watching the scene. She had worked with enough animals to recognize grief and hope when she saw them. This puppy wasn't just lost or abandoned. He was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. "I'm going to try a different approach," Sarah told Rodriguez. Instead of trying to catch the puppy directly, she walked to a spot about 20 feet away from his position and sat down on the ground. She pulled a small bag of dog treats from her pocket and simply waited. The puppy noticed her immediately but didn't move from his spot. His ears perked up at the sound of the treat bag, and she could see him struggling between hunger and his determination to maintain his vigil. Sarah opened the bag slowly, letting the smell of the treats drift toward him on the morning breeze. For nearly an hour, they sat in this silent standoff. Sarah didn't move closer or try to call to him. She simply sat there, occasionally tossing a treat halfway between them. The puppy would glance at the treats but refused to leave his post. Finally, Sarah tried something different. She began talking to him in a soft, gentle voice, not trying to coax him closer, but simply acknowledging his presence. "You're waiting for someone, aren't you, little guy? Someone very special who used to come through these gates." At the sound of her voice, the puppy's ears swiveled toward her, though he kept his eyes fixed on the gate. Sarah continued talking, telling him about her own dogs at home, describing the other animals she had helped at the base clinic. As the morning wore on, base personnel came and went, and the puppy's routine became clear to Sarah. He would perk up at every approaching vehicle, watch intently as people got out, and then settle back down when his person wasn't among them. The hope in his eyes each time, followed by the disappointment, was almost too much to bear. "Someone trained you well," Sarah observed quietly. "You know how to wait, how to stay in one place. You're not just any puppy, are you?" Around noon, Sarah noticed the puppy beginning to sway slightly where he sat. The combination of exhaustion, hunger, and the hot sun was taking its toll on his small body. She knew she needed to act soon, but she also sensed that forcing the issue would only make him more afraid and resistant. She stood up slowly, leaving the treats on the ground, and walked back toward the veterinary clinic. But instead of leaving entirely, she positioned herself where she could still observe the puppy, while appearing to go about her normal duties. An hour later, she saw him finally approach the treats she had left behind. He ate them quickly, constantly looking back toward the gate to make sure he wasn't missing anything important. After finishing the food, he returned to his exact position and resumed his vigil. That evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave for the day, she made one more attempt. This time she brought a small bowl of water along with more treats. The puppy was clearly exhausted, his head nodding as he fought to stay awake. "You can't keep this up forever, sweetheart," she said softly, setting the water bowl down closer to him than she had dared before. "Whoever you're waiting for would want you to be safe and healthy." To her surprise, the puppy looked directly at her for the first time. His brown eyes were filled with such sadness and longing that Sarah felt tears prick at her own eyes. In that moment, she made a promise to herself and to him. "I'm going to help you," she whispered. "Whatever happened, whoever you're waiting for, we're going to figure this out together. But first we need to get you somewhere safe." As darkness fell over the base, the tiny German shepherd settled down for another night of waiting. Unaware that his vigil had touched the heart of someone who would stop at nothing to uncover the truth behind his mysterious appearance at the gate. The next morning brought an unexpected breakthrough. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived at the base early, hoping to check on the puppy before her scheduled appointments began. As she approached the gate area, she was surprised to find Sergeant Rodriguez crouched down near the fence, speaking quietly to someone on his radio. "Doc, you need to see this," Rodriguez called out when he spotted her. He pointed toward the puppy's usual waiting spot, where the little German shepherd sat as always. But this time he wasn't alone. An elderly man in civilian clothes stood about 10 feet away from the puppy, tears streaming down his weathered face. The man appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and hands that shook slightly as he reached toward the small dog. "His name is Scout," the man said when Sarah approached. "He belonged to my grandson, Private Danny Chen. Danny was deployed to Afghanistan 6 months ago." Sarah's heart sank as she began to understand the situation. She had seen enough military families to recognize the weight of grief in the old man's voice. "Danny found Scout when he was just 3 weeks old," the grandfather continued. "The puppy had been abandoned near the base where Danny was stationed overseas. Danny bottle-fed him, taught him basic commands, and Scout became his constant companion. They were inseparable." The puppy, hearing his name and possibly recognizing the man's voice, took a few tentative steps forward but still maintained his position near the gate. "Danny sent Scout home to me about a month before." The man's voice broke. "Before the incident, he said he wanted to make sure Scout would be safe, that he was worried about bringing him back through all the travel and quarantine procedures." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to Danny?" The grandfather pulled a folded letter from his pocket with shaking hands. "Danny was killed in action 3 weeks ago. The funeral was last week. But Scout somehow knew. The day we got the news, he disappeared from my backyard. I've been searching for him ever since." Rodriguez stepped forward, his own voice thick with emotion. "How did he know to come here?" "Your grandson was deployed overseas, not stationed at this base." "Danny grew up on this base," the grandfather explained. "My son, Danny's father, was stationed here for 8 years. Danny spent his childhood running around these grounds, playing near this very gate. When his father would come home from deployments, Danny would wait right here, in this exact spot, watching for his dad's convoy to return." The pieces began falling into place for Sarah. Scout wasn't just waiting for any soldier to return. He was waiting in the place where his beloved Danny had once waited for his own father. Somehow, the intelligent puppy had made the connection between this location and the return of soldiers. "Scout's been coming here every day since Danny died, hasn't he?" Sarah asked gently. The grandfather nodded, wiping his eyes. "I think he believes if he waits here long enough, Danny will come home, just like Danny's father used to." Sarah approached Scout slowly, her heart breaking for the loyal little dog who was mourning his human in the only way he knew how. She knelt down and spoke softly to him. "Scout, your Danny loved you so much that he made sure you would be safe. He sent you to his grandfather because he wanted you to be taken care of." The puppy's ears perked up at the mention of Danny's name, and for the first time since she had been observing him, Scout looked away from the gate to focus on a human face. "He's been eating the food we leave," Rodriguez observed, "but he always comes back here. It's like he knows something we don't." The grandfather slowly lowered himself to the ground, sitting cross-legged about 5 feet from Scout. "Danny taught him to wait," he said. "Taught him patience and loyalty. Scout doesn't understand that some waits don't have endings." As if responding to his grandfather's voice, Scout took another small step forward. His tail gave the faintest wag, the first sign of happiness Sarah had seen from him. "I brought something," the grandfather said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a worn military dog tag on a chain. This was Danny's. He wore it every day, and Scout used to sleep curled up against it when Danny would take it off at night. The effect on Scout was immediate. His whole body perked up, and he took several more steps toward the grandfather, his nose working to catch the familiar scent. Danny's scent is still on it, the grandfather explained. I thought maybe it would help Scout understand. Sarah watched as the emotional reunion unfolded. Scout approached cautiously, his instincts warring between his learned behavior to wait at the gate and his recognition of something that belonged to his beloved human. When Scout finally reached the grandfather, the old man gently fastened the dog tag around the puppy's neck. Scout immediately began sniffing and nuzzling the familiar object, his tail wagging for the first time since Sarah had been watching him. Danny wrote about Scout in his letters, the grandfather shared. He said Scout was the smartest dog he'd ever known, that he seemed to understand things that other dogs couldn't. Danny was planning to train him as a therapy dog when he got home, to help other veterans. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Scout, who needed emotional healing himself, had been destined to provide comfort to others. Will you be able to care for him? Sarah asked, concerned about the grandfather's age and the demands of raising a young, energetic German Shepherd. I'm all Scout has left of Danny, the old man replied firmly. And he's all I have left of my grandson. We need each other now. Rodriguez cleared his throat. Sir, we'd like to help in any way we can. Scout has become special to all of us here at the base. Maybe we could arrange for him to visit regularly or help with his training. The grandfather's eyes brightened. Danny would have liked that. He always said that Scout belonged to the military family, not just to him. As they talked, Scout continued to wear Danny's dog tag, occasionally looking back toward the gate, but no longer with the desperate intensity of before. It was as if the familiar scent and the presence of Danny's grandfather had begun to ease his vigil. He'll need time to understand, Sarah observed. Dogs grieve differently than humans, but they do grieve. Scout may continue coming back here for a while. Then we'll bring him, the grandfather decided. If this place brings him comfort and helps him remember Danny, then we'll come here together. Maybe eventually he'll understand that some journeys don't end with a homecoming, but the love remains forever. Over the following weeks, Dr. Sarah Mitchell found herself deeply involved in Scout's gradual healing process. True to his word, Danny's grandfather, whom everyone now called Mr. Chen, brought Scout to the base every few days. The visits became a routine that seemed to help both the grieving puppy and the elderly man who had lost his beloved grandson. Sarah had arranged for Scout to receive a full veterinary examination, and what she discovered both impressed and worried her. Despite his young age and the trauma he had experienced, Scout was remarkably intelligent and well-trained. However, he was also showing clear signs of depression and anxiety that needed careful attention. He's responding to basic commands perfectly, Sarah explained to Mr. Chen during one of their visits. Danny did an excellent job training him, but Scout is also exhibiting behaviors consistent with separation anxiety and grief. Dogs can experience these emotions just as deeply as humans do. Mr. Chen nodded, watching as Scout sat obediently but with sad eyes fixed on the gate. At home, he barely eats unless I sit with him, and every night he goes to the window and watches the street, like he's still waiting. Sarah had been researching canine grief and post-traumatic stress in military dogs. What she learned gave her hope for Scout's recovery, but also made her realize that his healing would require a special approach. I have an idea, Sarah told Mr. Chen. There's a program I've heard about where dogs who have lost their military handlers are paired with veterans who need emotional support. It's still experimental, but the results have been promising. The idea intrigued Mr. Chen, but he was hesitant. Scout is all I have left of Danny. I don't want to give him up. You wouldn't be giving him up, Sarah assured him. You would still be his family. But Scout might benefit from having a purpose again, something that honors Danny's memory while helping him heal. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a convoy returning from a training exercise. Scout immediately perked up, his ears forward and tail slightly raised as he watched each vehicle pass through the gate. When the last truck entered without bringing Danny home, Scout's shoulders sagged in the familiar gesture of disappointment that broke everyone's hearts. Sergeant Rodriguez approached them, having observed the scene. Doc, I've been thinking about what you said regarding therapy dogs. We have a lot of young soldiers here who are dealing with their own struggles. Some of them knew Danny, and they've been asking about Scout. Sarah felt a spark of inspiration. What if we started small? What if Scout could spend some time here at the base, not just visiting the gate, but actually helping people? It might give him a sense of purpose while he's learning to cope with his loss. The idea began to take shape over several conversations. The base commander, who had been moved by Scout's story, approved a trial program. Scout would spend certain days at the base under Sarah's supervision, interacting with soldiers and staff members who could benefit from animal therapy. The first session was arranged with Private Maria Santos, a young soldier who had been struggling with homesickness and anxiety since joining the military. Maria had grown up with dogs and missed having animal companionship. "He's beautiful," Maria said when Sarah introduced her to Scout. "But he looks so sad." "Scout is learning to heal, just like many of us do when we lose someone important," Sarah explained. "Sometimes helping others can be part of that healing process." As Maria sat on the ground and gently called to Scout, something remarkable happened. The puppy, who had been withdrawn and focused only on the gate for weeks, slowly approached her. When Maria began talking softly about her own homesickness and fears, Scout seemed to sense her distress and moved closer, eventually resting his head on her lap. "It's like he understands," Maria whispered, tears in her eyes as she stroked Scout's soft fur, "like he knows what it feels like to miss someone." Mr. Chen, who had been watching from a distance, felt his own eyes well up. Danny always said Scout was special, that he could read people's emotions better than most humans. Over the next few weeks, Scout's transformation was gradual but noticeable. He still waited by the gate during his visits, but he was also beginning to engage with the people around him. Each interaction seemed to bring back a little more of his puppyish spirit, while honoring the deep bond he had shared with Danny. Sarah documented everything carefully, noting how Scout's appetite improved on days when he worked with people, how his sleep patterns became more regular, and how he began showing signs of the playful intelligence that Danny had described in his letters. "He's not just healing," Sarah told Mr. Chen one afternoon as they watched Scout playing gently with a group of young soldiers. "He's discovering that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to express itself." The breakthrough moment came when Scout, for the first time since his arrival at the base, voluntarily left his position by the gate to comfort a soldier who had begun crying during a therapy session. Scout seemed to understand that his presence was needed elsewhere, that there were people who could benefit from the love and loyalty that Danny had helped nurture in him. "Danny would be so proud," Mr. Chen said, his voice thick with emotion. He always wanted Scout to help others. Even though Danny isn't here to see it, his dream is coming true. Sarah realized that Scout's story was becoming something larger than anyone had expected. The puppy who had waited faithfully at the gate was evolving into a bridge between grief and healing, between loss and hope. His presence at the base was helping not just him process his own trauma, but was also providing comfort to others who were dealing with their own challenges. As the weeks passed, Scout's visits to the gate became less about desperate waiting and more about remembrance. He would sit quietly for a few minutes as if paying his respects, and then turn his attention to the work that was becoming his new purpose in life. The little German shepherd was learning that while some kinds of waiting end in disappointment, other kinds of waiting, the patient kind filled with love and service to others, can lead to unexpected forms of fulfillment and healing. 2 months after Scout's first appearance at the gate, Dr. Sarah Mitchell received a phone call that would change everything. The caller identified himself as Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, and he had a story that would unlock the final pieces of Scout's mysterious journey. "Dr. Mitchell, I understand you've been caring for a German shepherd puppy named Scout. I believe I have information about how he ended up at your base." Sarah's heart raced as she listened to the officer's account. Lieutenant Colonel Wright had served alongside Danny Chen in Afghanistan and had been present during the incident that claimed Danny's life. Scout wasn't supposed to come home alone, Wright explained during their meeting at the base the following day. Danny had made arrangements for Scout to be shipped back to the States with another soldier who was rotating home early. But there was a mix-up with the paperwork and Scout ended up on the wrong transport. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What kind of mix-up? Scout was accidentally sent to the wrong base initially. He spent a week at a facility in Virginia before anyone realized the error. By the time they figured out where he was supposed to go, which was to Mr. Chen's address, Scout had disappeared from the temporary kennel facility. The pieces were starting to fall into place. But Sarah still didn't understand how Scout had found his way to their specific base, which was hundreds of miles from both Virginia and Mr. Chen's home. Wright continued his explanation. Here's where it gets interesting. The transport that Scout was supposed to be on, the one with Danny's belongings and personal effects, made a scheduled stop at your base for refueling. Scout somehow escaped from the Virginia facility the same day that transport passed through here. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Are you saying that Scout somehow tracked that transport? It's the only explanation that makes sense. Dogs have an incredible sense of smell, and Scout had been living with Danny's scent for months. If Danny's belongings were on that transport, Scout might have been able to follow the trail. The implications were staggering. Scout had somehow managed to track his beloved human scent across hundreds of miles, only to arrive at the base after the transport had already left. In his confusion and grief, he had waited at the gate, sensing that Danny had been there but not understanding that he had already gone. There's something else, Wright added gently. Danny's personal effects, including some of his clothes and gear, are still in storage here on the base. They were supposed to be shipped to his family, but there was a delay in processing. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Scout hadn't been wrong to wait at the gate. In a sense, part of Danny really was still there. Could we arrange for Scout to see these items? Sarah asked. It might help him understand. Wright nodded. I think that's exactly what needs to happen. 3 days later, Sarah, Mr. Chen, and Scout made their way to the base storage facility. Wright had arranged for them to have private access to Danny's belongings, understanding the sensitive nature of the situation. When they opened the storage unit, Scout's reaction was immediate and profound. His entire body began trembling and he whined softly as the familiar scents reached him. Inside were Danny's military uniforms, his personal gear, photographs, and letters. It's okay, boy, Mr. Chen said softly, his own voice shaking with emotion. These are Danny's things. You found them. You found him. Scout approached the storage unit cautiously, his nose working overtime to process all the familiar smells. He spent several minutes investigating each item, his tail wagging slowly as he reconnected with his human scent. Sarah watched in amazement as Scout seemed to understand, for the first time, that his vigil had not been in vain. He had successfully tracked Danny to this place. The fact that Danny wasn't physically there anymore was a separate truth that Scout was still learning to accept. Among Danny's belongings, they found something that made Mr. Chen break down completely. It was a letter addressed to Scout written in Danny's handwriting. Danny wrote to his dog? Sarah asked, deeply moved. He wrote to Scout every week, Mr. Chen explained through his tears. Even when he couldn't send the letters, he would write them and save them. He said it helped him feel connected to Scout, and he planned to read them all to him when he got home. Wright had been quietly observing the reunion. Would you like me to leave you alone with these things? He asked. Actually, Mr. Chen said, I think there's something we need to do together. What followed was one of the most moving ceremonies Sarah had ever witnessed. Mr. Chen read Danny's final letter to Scout aloud, his voice breaking as he shared his grandson's words of love and hope. The letter talked about all the adventures they would have when Danny returned, the training they would do together, and the other dogs and people Scout would help. My brave boy, Mr. Chen read from the letter, if something happens to me, I want you to know that you made every single day brighter. I want you to keep being brave, keep helping people, and know that love doesn't end just because someone goes away. You'll always be my good boy, and I'll always be proud of you. Scout sat perfectly still during the reading, as if he understood every word. When Mr. Chen finished, Scout approached Danny's uniform and lay down next to it, resting his head on the familiar fabric. He's saying goodbye, Sarah realized, watching Scout's peaceful expression. After spending an hour with Danny's belongings, something had shifted in Scout. When they left the storage facility, he didn't immediately run to his usual waiting spot by the gate. Instead, he stayed close to Mr. Chen and Sarah, looking around the base with new awareness. I think he understands now, Wright observed. He found what he was looking for. He tracked Danny here, and now he knows this is where the trail ends. That evening, as they prepared to leave the base, Scout made one final visit to his waiting spot by the gate. But this time, instead of sitting and staring hopefully at every passing vehicle, he simply stood there for a few minutes as if paying his respects, before turning and walking back to where the humans waited for him. He's ready, Mr. Chen said quietly. He's ready to start the next part of his life. Sarah realized that Scout's incredible journey His determination to find Danny and his faithful waiting had all been necessary parts of his grieving process. He had needed to search, to hope, to wait, and finally to understand. Only by completing that cycle could he begin to heal and find new purpose. The little German shepherd who had waited at the gate was ready to stop waiting and start living again, carrying Danny's love with him as he moved forward into whatever came next. 6 months after Scout's first appearance at the gate, his transformation was nothing short of remarkable. What had begun as a grief-stricken puppy's vigil had evolved into something that no one could have predicted. Scout had become the unofficial therapy dog of the base, and his story had spread far beyond the military community. Dr. Sarah Mitchell documented Scout's progress with the dedication of a researcher, but also with the heart of someone who had witnessed a miracle of resilience and love. The data she collected was impressive. Soldiers who worked with Scout showed measurable improvements in stress levels, sleep quality, and overall emotional well-being. He has an almost supernatural ability to sense when someone is struggling, Sarah reported to the base commander during a monthly review. Last week, he interrupted a training session to go to a soldier who was having a panic attack. Scout knew something was wrong before any of the humans in the room noticed. The base had officially registered Scout as part of their mental health program, making him one of the youngest certified therapy dogs in military history. His schedule was carefully managed to ensure he wasn't overworked, but Scout seemed to thrive on the interaction and purpose his new role provided. Mr. Chen had moved closer to the base, finding a small apartment that allowed pets just 10 minutes away. Scout and I are a team now, he explained to visitors. I lost my grandson, but I gained a grandson of sorts in Scout. We take care of each other. The relationship between the elderly man and the young dog had become a source of healing for both of them. Mr. Chen had found new purpose in supporting Scout's work, while Scout had learned that family could take many forms. One particularly meaningful development was Scout's work with incoming recruits. Many young soldiers arrived at the base homesick and anxious, struggling with the transition to military life. Scout seemed to have a special connection with these newcomers, perhaps remembering his own feelings of loss and displacement. When I first got here, I was ready to quit, admitted Private Tommy Rodriguez, Sergeant Rodriguez's nephew who had recently enlisted. I missed my family, I was scared, and I felt like I didn't belong. Then I met Scout, and somehow he made me understand that feeling lost doesn't mean you'll never find your way. Scout's sessions with Tommy had become legendary around the base. The young soldier would sit with Scout for hours, talking about his fears and dreams, while Scout listened with the patience that only dogs possess. Tommy had gone from being on the verge of washing out to becoming one of the most promising recruits in his class. Sarah had begun receiving calls from other military bases, asking about Scout's program and whether it could be replicated elsewhere. The success they were seeing was unprecedented, but Sarah knew that Scout's unique background and training made him special. What Danny created in Scout wasn't just a well-trained dog, she explained to a visiting colonel from another base. He created a dog who understands loss, who has experienced grief and healing, and who can connect with people who are going through similar struggles. The most touching aspect of Scout's work was his continued connection to Danny's memory. Mr. Chen had created a small memorial garden behind his apartment, with a photo of Danny and a plaque that read, Private Danny Chen. His love lives on through Scout. Scout would visit the memorial every morning and evening, a ritual that helped him maintain his connection to his first human while embracing his new life. One day, Sarah received a call that surprised her completely. It was from Danny's unit. Commander Colonel Martinez, who was calling from Afghanistan. Dr. Mitchell, I've been hearing incredible things about Scout from my soldiers who have rotated back to the States. I wanted you to know that what you've accomplished with Danny's dog is exactly what Danny would have wanted. Colonel Martinez went on to explain that Danny had often talked about his plans for Scout, his dreams of training him to help other veterans and active duty soldiers. Danny used to say that Scout had enough love to heal a whole battalion, the colonel continued. It sounds like he was right. The colonel had another surprise. We've been collecting money from the soldiers in Danny's unit, and we want to contribute to Scout's program. We've raised enough to fund his care and training for the next 2 years. The generosity moved Sarah to tears, but it also gave her an idea. Colonel, Would you be interested in video calling with some of the soldiers here who work with Scout? I think it would mean a lot to them to hear from Danny's unit. What followed was a series of video calls that connected Scout's current work with his origins in Afghanistan. Soldiers from Danny's unit shared stories about Scout as a puppy, about Danny's devotion to him, and about how proud Danny would be to see what Scout was accomplishing. During one of these calls, Scout seemed to recognize voices from his past. His ears perked up and he approached the computer screen with the same focused attention he had once given to the gate. When one of Danny's closest friends in the unit spoke directly to Scout through the video connection, Scout placed his paw on the screen and whined softly. "He remembers us," the soldier said, his voice thick with emotion. "Hey boy, we miss Danny too, but look at you now. Look at all the good you're doing." These connections helped Scout understand that his current life wasn't a replacement for his life with Danny, but rather a continuation of it. He was still serving, still helping soldiers, still being the loyal and loving companion that Danny had raised him to be. Sarah began working on a comprehensive report about Scout's program, hoping to establish similar initiatives at bases across the country. But she knew that while the program could be replicated, Scout himself was irreplaceable. "Every dog has the potential to heal and comfort," she wrote in her report. But Scout carries something extra, the love and training of a soldier who understood that true strength comes from compassion, and that sometimes the greatest service we can provide is simply being present for someone who needs us. As Scout's reputation grew, he remained grounded by his daily routines with Mr. Chen and his work at the base. He had learned to balance remembrance with purpose, grief with joy, and loss with love. The little puppy who had waited at the gate had become a symbol of resilience and hope, proving that even in the darkest times, love finds a way to create light. 1 year after Scout first appeared at the gate, the base was preparing for something unprecedented, the first annual Danny Chen Memorial Day, dedicated to honoring fallen soldiers and the animals who serve alongside them. Scout had become the inspiration for this event, which would bring together military families, veterans, and therapy animals from across the region. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood in her office, looking at the proclamation from the Secretary of Defense officially recognizing Scout's contributions to military mental health. The document would be presented during the Memorial Day ceremony, but Sarah knew the real recognition came from the dozens of soldiers whose lives Scout had touched. "Dr. Mitchell," came a voice from her doorway. She turned to see Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, one of Scout's most frequent visitors, standing with tears in her eyes. "What is it, Jennifer?" Sarah asked, immediately concerned. "I just wanted to thank you, and to thank Scout. I'm being transferred to a new base next month, and I don't know how I would have made it through this deployment without him." Jennifer had been struggling with severe anxiety and depression when she first started working with Scout 6 months earlier. The combination of deployment stress and personal issues had left her feeling isolated and hopeless. Scout had somehow sensed her pain from their first meeting and had refused to leave her side during that initial session. "He saved my life," Jennifer continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a night when I was at my lowest point, thinking about giving up completely. Scout somehow knew, and he wouldn't leave my quarters. He stayed with me all night, just being there when I needed him most." Sarah felt her own eyes fill with tears. Stories like Jennifer's had become common, but they never failed to move her. Scout's impact went far beyond what any training manual could have predicted. As the Memorial Day approached, preparations intensified around the base. Media outlets had picked up Scout's story, and requests for interviews were pouring in. However, Mr. Chen and Sarah had agreed to keep Scout's exposure limited, prioritizing his well-being and his work with the soldiers over publicity. "Scout isn't a celebrity," Mr. Chen had said firmly when a national news program requested an exclusive feature. "He's a working dog with an important job." Danny would have wanted him to help people, not perform for cameras. The Memorial Day itself dawned bright and clear. Hundreds of people gathered on the base, including many of Danny's family members, who had traveled from across the country to honor their fallen relative and meet the dog who was carrying on his legacy. Scout seemed to understand the significance of the day. Dressed in a special ceremonial collar that bore both his own name and Danny's, he moved through the crowd with unusual gravity, greeting visitors but maintaining the dignified bearing that had become his trademark. The ceremony began with a reading of Danny's story, followed by testimonials from soldiers who had worked with Scout. Each speaker emphasized how Scout had helped them not just cope with their challenges, but find new strength and purpose. "Scout doesn't just provide comfort," explained Sergeant Rodriguez, who had become one of Scout's primary handlers. "He teaches us about resilience. Here's a dog who lost everything, who grieved deeply, but who found a way to turn that grief into something that helps others. That's a lesson every soldier can learn from." The highlight of the ceremony came when Mr. Chen took the stage, with Scout sitting calmly at his side. The elderly man's speech was brief but powerful. "My grandson Danny dreamed of coming home to train Scout as a therapy dog," Mr. Chen said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "Danny didn't get to come home, but his dream did. Every day, Scout carries out the mission that Danny envisioned for him. In that way, Danny is still serving, still helping his fellow soldiers through Scout." As if on cue, Scout stood and placed his paw on Mr. Chen's hand, a gesture that brought many in the audience to tears. The formal recognition from the Secretary of Defense was presented next, officially designating Scout as a special therapy animal and authorizing funding for the expansion of his program to other military installations. Sarah accepted the award on Scout's behalf, knowing that this recognition would help other dogs like Scout receive the support they needed to serve. But the most meaningful moment of the day came during the informal gathering that followed the ceremony. Danny's parents, who had flown in from California, finally met Scout in person. The reunion was emotional for everyone present. "He looks just like Danny described him in his letters," Danny's mother said through her tears as Scout approached her gently. Danny used to write about Scout's eyes, how intelligent and compassionate they were. I can see what he meant. Scout seemed to recognize something familiar in Danny's parents, perhaps catching traces of Danny's scent or sensing the family connection. He spent several minutes with them, allowing them to pet him and speak to him about their son. "Thank you for taking care of our boy's dog," Danny's father said to Mr. Chen. "And thank you for letting him become what Danny always knew he could be." The day concluded with the dedication of a permanent memorial on the base grounds. The memorial featured a bronze statue of a soldier kneeling beside a German shepherd, with an inscription that read, "In memory of all who serve, human and canine, and the bonds that transcend loss." Scout approached the memorial statue and sat quietly beside it, as if understanding that this monument represented not just Danny, but all the soldiers and animals who had made sacrifices in service to others. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself standing with Scout, Mr. Chen, and several of the soldiers who had become part of Scout's extended family. The little dog who had once waited desperately at the gate was now surrounded by people who loved him and supported his mission. "Danny would be so proud," Mr. Chen said quietly, watching Scout interact with a young soldier who was struggling with homesickness. Sarah nodded, but she was already thinking about the future. Scout's program was expanding, and there were plans to train other dogs using the methods they had developed. But more importantly, Scout had proven that healing was possible, that love could survive loss, and that purpose could emerge from the deepest grief. The Memorial Day had been a celebration not just of the past, but of the hope that Scout represented for the future. Every soldier he helped, every moment of comfort he provided, every example of resilience he demonstrated was a testament to the enduring power of the bond between Danny and his loyal companion. 5 years had passed since Scout first appeared at the gate, and the once tiny puppy had grown into a magnificent German shepherd whose reputation extended far beyond the military base. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now the director of the military animal therapy program, stood in her expanded office surrounded by awards, photographs, and letters from people whose lives Scout had touched. The program that began with one grieving puppy had grown into a network of therapy animals serving military installations across the country. Scout had become the model for training other therapy dogs, and his protocols were being studied by veterinarians and animal behaviorists worldwide. But the most remarkable thing about Scout wasn't his fame or his achievements. It was how he had never forgotten his origins while embracing his destiny. Mr. Chen, now in his late 70s but still spry and devoted to Scout, continued their daily routine. Every morning they would visit the memorial statue on the base where Scout would sit quietly for a few minutes before beginning his workday. It had become a ritual that connected his past with his present, honoring Danny while embracing his mission to help others. "He's never forgotten," Mr. Chen often told visitors who asked about Scout's early days. "But he's learned that remembering doesn't mean waiting. It means carrying love forward." Scout's typical day now included visits to multiple departments on the base. He spent mornings with new recruits, helping them adjust to military life. Afternoons were reserved for one-on-one sessions with soldiers dealing with stress, trauma, or personal challenges. Evenings often found him visiting the base hospital, where his presence brought comfort to both patients and medical staff. The impact was measurable and profound. Studies showed that bases with therapy dogs like Scout had significantly lower rates of anxiety, depression, and disciplinary problems among personnel. More importantly, the culture of the base had shifted toward greater openness about mental health and emotional well-being. "Scout broke down barriers," explained Colonel Martinez, who had transferred to the base specifically to work with the therapy program. When tough soldiers saw that it was okay to find comfort with a dog, it became okay to admit when they needed help in other areas too. One of Scout's most successful programs involved working with soldiers preparing for deployment. Many service members struggled with anxiety about leaving their families and facing unknown dangers overseas. Scout's sessions helped them process these fears while building resilience and confidence. "There's something about Scout that makes you feel like you can handle whatever comes," said Captain Lisa Park, who credited her sessions with Scout for helping her through a difficult deployment to the Middle East. "He's been through loss and trauma, but he's still here, still helping others. If he can do it, so can we." Scout's story had also inspired a children's book series that taught young readers about courage, loyalty, and healing after loss. The books, approved by Mr. Chen and Sarah, donated all proceeds to programs supporting military families and animal therapy initiatives. On this particular day, Sarah was preparing for a special visitor. Dr. Emily Watson, a researcher from the National Institute of Mental Health, was coming to study Scout's program as part of a federal initiative to expand animal therapy in all branches of the military. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Watson said as she arrived, "I've read all your reports, but I have to admit some of Scout's success stories seem almost too remarkable to believe." Sarah smiled. "I felt the same way when I first started working with him. Would you like to observe a session?" They made their way to the therapy room where Scout was working with Sergeant Michael Torres, a veteran who had been struggling with PTSD since returning from his third deployment. Michael had been resistant to traditional therapy but had agreed to try working with Scout. Through the observation window, they watched as Scout seemed to sense exactly when Michael needed comfort and when he needed space. The dog would move closer during moments of distress, offering his warm presence, then step back when Michael needed to work through difficult emotions on his own. "It's like he reads their minds," Dr. Watson whispered in amazement. "How does he know exactly what each person needs?" "Danny trained him well," Sarah replied, "but I think Scout's own experiences with loss and healing give him insights that can't be taught. He recognizes pain because he's felt it. He understands healing because he's lived it." After the session, Michael emerged from the room with Scout beside him. His face showed the kind of peace that Sarah had learned to recognize as a sign of breakthrough. "Scout helped me understand something today," Michael told Sarah. "I've been so focused on the things I lost overseas that I forgot about the things I still have. Scout lost his person, but he didn't lose his purpose. He found a new way to serve." Later that afternoon, Dr. Watson accompanied Sarah and Scout on their visit to the memorial statue. She watched as Scout performed his daily ritual, sitting quietly beside the bronze figures that honored Danny and all fallen soldiers. "This is what makes him special," Sarah explained. "He's learned to balance remembrance with hope, grief with service. He honors his past while embracing his future." As they stood there, a young soldier approached the memorial. Sarah recognized him as Private David Kim, a recent recruit who had been struggling with homesickness. Scout immediately went to the young man's side, offering his quiet companionship. "I miss my family," David said to Scout, as if the dog could understand every word. "But I want to serve. I want to make a difference." "How do you do both?" Scout, simply sat beside David, his presence offering the kind of comfort that words couldn't provide. In that moment, Dr. Watson understood what made Scout's program so effective. He doesn't solve their problems, she realized. He shows them they're not alone with their problems. As the sun began to set over the base, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. Scout's story had begun with profound loss, but it had become a testament to the resilience of the human and animal spirit. The little puppy who had once waited at the gate in desperate hope had grown into a symbol of healing and service. He had learned that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms and finds new ways to touch the world. Scout's legacy was already extending far beyond his own life. The dogs being trained in his methods, the soldiers he had helped who were now helping others, the changes in military culture around mental health, all of these would continue long after Scout's working days were over. But for now, Scout was content to continue his daily mission, sitting with those who grieved, comforting those who struggled, and proving every day that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply showing up for someone who needs you. As they walked back toward the veterinary clinic, Scout paused one last time to look back at the memorial statue. Then he turned and trotted alongside his human companions, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, carrying Danny's love with him as he had every day since that first morning at the gate. The little German shepherd had found his purpose, and in doing so, had helped countless others find theirs. His story was proof that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way to create light, and that the bonds between humans and animals can transcend loss to become something beautiful and healing for the world.